Now entering the Squared Circle pit, a man who needs no introduction to pro wrestling fans. He was the former executive vice president of WCW, also a maker of a fine beer. I'm talking about Eric Bischoff. Eric, thank you for joining the Squared Circle pit.
Glad to be here.
I want to mention, of course, that Eric is going to be... You're a busy man. Not only were you just on the 25th anniversary of Raw, but you're going to be appearing at the Wyndham Garden in Sterling Heights, Michigan for the inaugural Astronomicon with a bunch of other wrestlers and horror aficionados. More info and tickets are available at astronomicon.com. Now, Eric, this is a metal website. I was just curious, what music were you listening to when you were growing up? What music grabbed your ear?
Oh, well, gosh, so much depends on when. You know, I grew up in Detroit, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So, and being a product of the, really, the year I was born in the mid-'50s. I'm 62 years old. But, the early 60s, obviously Motown had a major influence on me. My cousins were all a lot old. I was the oldest of my family. But every weekend we would go over to our cousin's house over around 6 Mile or 7 Mile in Gratiot. And they were all, 10, 12 years older than us. So, of course, they were teenagers at the time, and they were heavily influenced by Motown, which means I was heavily influenced by the Motown sound. And Temptation, Smokey Robinson, The Miracles, Gladys Knight, The Pips, you name it. Everybody you would suspect. As I got older, and I still love that era of music. Smokey Robinson to this day just brings back all kinds of great memories, as does some of the early Temptation stuff. But as I got a little bit older and my taste started gravitating more towards rock, obviously Bob Seger was high on my list, and Mitch Ryder in the Detroit Wheels. Coincidentally, Joey Goots, who is one of the lead, I believe he played lead guitar for Mitch Ryder in the Detroit Wheels, was my next door neighbor. So,
oh, wow.
And he was a little older than I was. When I say we grew up together, I was probably, when I was like 10 years old, he might have been 14, 15. But early, when he started playing for Mitch Ryder, of course, that just, brought me even closer to Mitch Ryder and Detroit Wheels. So, I've been influenced by a number of people. I obviously, depending on my age and where I was in my life. I moved away from Detroit in about 68, 69, and then the whole kind of hippie thing started happening, and then I was all about Jimi Hendrix, and still am for the longest time, which is one of the reasons why I used Voodoo Child as the entrance music for Hulk Hogan and myself in the New World Order, because I was so heavily influenced by Jimmy Hart. Or not Jimmy Hart, by
Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, not Jimmy Hart. Trust me, not Jimmy Hart. But,
well, Jimmy Hart had a music career himself too, so that wouldn't be too far up in the gentry.
Yeah, he probably had his own. I think his one hit wonder. It was "Keep on Dancing." I think.
Yeah.
Was his big hit. So it all depends, like I said, on where I was in my life. And if you looked at if someone found me, God forbid, in a plane wreck, and they found my playlist on my iPhone, they would go through my playlist and they would just think I was some kind of like bipolar or schizophrenic kind of dude, because in any given moment, I'll be listening to Celtic music, I'll be listening to country music, I'll be flashing back to Motown, I'll be listening to rap or hip hop. It's just, my taste is so varied, it's kind of hard to describe.
Cool. I'm glad you brought up Hendrix. Actually, that was something I wanted to talk about. One thing about the New World Order that was so cool is, everyone kind of looked like they were a rock band. They were, like a gang of like either like a bike gang or a rock group, and you had the really cool rock music with the cool riffs and everything like that. How did you? Was it a process to get Jimi Hendrix's music licensed? I know for the main NWO riff, you also use like another Hendrix riff, the name of which escapes me, but it was just like, how did that work out licensing wise with the music department? I'm curious.
It's funny, and I'm glad you brought that up. But so many people assume that I spent a fortune to get those rights, because today, if you were to try to license, any of that music from Jimi Hendrix, you would pay through the nose for it. It would be almost prohibitive or impossible, unless you were doing a feature film or a really expensive commercial with a really big budget. It just wouldn't make any sense. But this was, way before digital and all that comes with it, and all that happened to the music industry as a result of it, file sharing and peer-to-peer kind of thing. So
Right.
I actually negotiated the rights myself with the Hendrix estate, negotiated with Jimi's sister, who was in charge of the estate at the time, and I got worldwide rights for Voodoo Child for use in television, pay-per-view, live events, all that. I think it was a 2-year deal for $100,000.
That is as close to a steal as you're going to get in the music industry.
I mean, like
think.
I said, I couldn't do it today because the world has changed.
Right.
The economy of the music industry has changed dramatically, and music licensing rights, that business has exploded in astronomical ways since, back in 96. So I certainly, it wasn't because I was such a master negotiator. It's just nobody was really pursuing, archive music that much. There wasn't a lot of money in archive music, and I was just able to do a little digging and get in touch with the family and cut my own deal without a lot of agents and attorneys in the middle of it.
I have to think that you exposed a lot of wrestling fans to Hendrix. I'm sure that was the first time a lot of teens, myself included at the time, really got into Hendrix, and now I'm a huge fan. And what do you think, like when let's talk about Hendrix music in general for a second. I think it's super important to a character. It immediately tells the audience who this character is. Was when you were running WCW, how seriously did you take entrance music in terms of the overall package?
Very, very seriously. To this day, I still write more as a hobby, but I play with feature film scripts and writing and creating different kinds of characters, and when I've written wrestling, I think the last time I wrote anything for wrestling was probably 3 or 4 years ago. I often start, if I'm looking for an idea, I often start with music, because music makes me feel, and it puts me into a vibe or a frame of mind that I need to be in to really see or feel a character in my mind's eye. For instance, there is a song, and I'm playing with the script right now, and I actually have been for years. When I have downtime or when I hit a creative kind of brick wall, oftentimes I'll sit down and dig up a feature film script that I've been playing with for, in some cases, 4, 5, 6, 8 years, and just start playing with it. And what it does is it stimulates my imagination and gets me thinking differently, creatively speaking, than I normally do. And sometimes I need to do that. I do it almost as an exercise. But there's a project I'm working on as a hobby called Desert Angel. And essentially the script is about a young woman in her 30s, whose brother had formerly been in law enforcement, but ended up over in Afghanistan and became a POW, and the government couldn't find him. The military couldn't find him. She knew he was over there, or she believed he was over there. And she comes from a relatively tough part of town, and outside of Sacramento, where motorcycle gangs and clubs, I should say, are prevalent. And long story short, without dragging you through the whole movie, our heroine in this case, my main character, goes out and makes contact with the president of a local biker club, and convinces him and the rest of the club to pack their bikes and head over to Afghanistan and try to find her brother. and she goes with it. So that's the premise of the movie. But that idea, and again, I want to emphasize for people that are listening to this or reading it, it's a hobby. It's just something I work on. I don't play golf. I don't watch football on TV. There's a lot of things I don't do, but sometimes I just like to write for the fun of writing, and this is that project. But the idea, the motivation for that project came from a Stevie Nicks song called Desert Angel. And I loved the song, and I listened to it over and over and over again when the first time I heard it, and still do to this day sometimes. And as I was listening to that song, this movie just kind of started playing in my head. And I hadn't given it any thought. I hadn't, it wasn't a goal of mine to try to attack a movie like this. It's just this song, as I closed my eyes and I listened to the song, the movie started manifesting in my head. So when you talk about, how important is music, there's a new series out on Amazon Prime right now called Goliath. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a Billy Bob Thornton series.
Yeah, I've seen trailers for it.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if you can, go to Amazon and watch that show, and check out the opening score to that series. The music tells you how to feel and the mood you should be in before you see the first frame of tape.
Right.
You get a vibe for the characters. You get a vibe for the tone of the series before you really even see the first character.
Yeah.
And I feel like when it comes to wrestling, music is much the same way. It not only defines the character, but it also sets the tone and the mood and prepares you for what that character's point of view is going to be.
That's a great point. Yeah, I agree completely. And I think WCW did an awesome job with having unique entrance themes, and some of which, were kind of like soft covers. I remember DDP had a Smells Like Teen Spirit kind of like sound-alike song. But what's interesting,
everybody does that because, especially as the music industry changed and people started smartening up to it,
right?
And you just go out and you couldn't replicate the kind of deal that I did with the Hendrix estate.
Yeah.
So your choice was, to basically rip off something else. You change a chord or two, or however many notes you had to change, I think, or bars or whatever it is. I'm not a music guy, but there's a formula that allows you to listen to a song, and a really good kind of studio musician can sit down and listen to a song, change what needs to be changed legally. And for people that aren't really paying close attention, you might not know the difference.
No, absolutely. And what I was going to say, though, was with the DDP thing, I remember reading online, like, oh, this is just a rip off of Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. And just hearing that, I was like, oh, well, let me hear Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit, because I was a little younger at the time. And it really just ended getting me into Nirvana. And in a way, like, pro wrestling kind of got me deeper into music, and WCW was a big part of it. I remember you guys had a compilation you put out around 98, 99, WCW Mayhem, the music, and 2 tracks I remember on there very vividly is you guys licensed Metallica's Seek and Destroy, which ended up being Sting's entrance theme for a while, which I thought was such a great entrance for him. And also you guys licensed Megadeth's Crush 'Em, which also like tied into a movie that Goldberg was in, and that was his theme for a while. Was it kind of the same thing as like with the Hendrix thing, where the licensing was a whole different world and it was much easier to get acts of that stature to work with you guys and have their music on TV every week?
Well, I think in the case of Goldberg's and Metallica, now I'm not sure about Metallica, but Dave Mustaine was interested in doing some stuff with us, and that's how some of that took place. We did the same thing with Gene Simmons and Kiss, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that, but yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, no, but it kind of segues into the same opportunity as WCW started to get more popular, and we were starting to make a much bigger splash in the mainstream entertainment community. We went from, gee, no one would really even want to license their music to us for any amount of money because we were wrestling, to, holy smokes, this wrestling thing over on TNT is really powerful.
Right.
And oh my God, there's Jimi Hendrix. Well, we should be a part of that too. So we went from not being able to get anybody to allow us to use their music, even for money, to people all of a sudden reaching out to us to try to do some, joint, promotional type things in the music area. Dave Mustaine is one of them. Gene Simmons is another. I ended up going to LA and sat down and had a couple drinks with Gene. Gene didn't drink, I did, at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And we ended up doing a deal that basically Gene came in and I think he played one or two of our live events. I think it was in Las Vegas. He was part of our show. We were going to do a joint kind of licensing and merchandising deal together using some of the Sting characters and WCW characters. And we're going to create a line of our own Kiss-inspired WCW characters so that we could merchandise them. And we had been planning, my intent when I launched that deal was actually to have, this was in 1999, and my goal was to have a pay-per-view on New Year's Eve, 1999. And we were going to do it at the Fiesta Bowl in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And I was going to stage it so that at midnight, the pay-per-view was going to end on a 3 count. Because everybody, if you remember, you may not remember, you may be too young, but everybody was so concerned about what was going to happen.
Oh, with the Y2K thing, yeah. Right.
With the Y2K thing. They thought computers were going to crash and the infrastructure was going to collapse and planes were going to fall out of the sky, all kinds of crazy nonsense. So I thought, all right, why not take advantage of this and party like it's 1999, so to speak, have a pay-per-view, and we were going to have Kiss playing on one end of the football field while we would have WCW pay-per-view action going on the other, and we'd just kind of alternate. We'd open up with a song, then we'd go down to the other end of the field, and we'd have a match, and at the end of the match, we'd go back down and have another song, and we'd just ping-pong back and forth throughout the night until the final match in the main event was going to end on a 3 count at exactly midnight. So that was the plan, but like a lot of plans, it was never executed.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about this. So the Demon debuted, I remember, and I remember there was a big Kiss performance. I believe it was on Nitro where the Demon arose, and I remember reading at the time, and you hinted at it, that the Demon was going to be one of a few Kiss characters, like that there were supposed to be other Kiss characters, other Kiss like was there going to be a Star Child character as well? So what was it?
That was,
so it would be exactly like a Kiss faction, essentially, that you planned to do there.
Yeah, it would have been a faction of Kiss-inspired characters, and we were going to merchandise them. Gene Simmons was going to own, a percentage of it. We were going to own a percentage of it. And we were going to promote it jointly.
I see. Yeah, and then things didn't go according to plan, I guess. I think that was actually when.
No, I got shit canned in September, and the pay-per-view never happened, and the whole deal fell apart.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask about a few things like that. I was curious if, like, when you started the NWO, which was, without question, the hottest angle of the 90s, I remember flipping out as a 13-year-old when Hulk Hogan walked out and all that at Bash at the Beach. And it was really, really hot. And then there never was really a conclusion to the angle. I think it kind of just tapered off after you left, and it might have been brought back. I think Vince Russo brought it back as like NWO 2000 or whatever. But when you were initially starting the angle, was there a finish line in mind? Was there a goal to how it was going to end?
There was, but it changed really quickly. I don't even remember what it was because, and again,
it's so long ago now.
Yeah. Well, it's not that it was so long ago. I say this often: context is king, and especially when you're looking back at something like the NWO, you also have to go back and look at that period of time and what else was going on, not only in wrestling but in entertainment. And to be really honest about it, when I created that idea and when it first started coming together, I was pretty excited about it, but I'd be lying and trying too hard to pat myself on the back if I were to suggest to you that I really knew deep down inside it was going to be this huge thing. I felt good about it, but I had no idea it was going to blow up the way it blew up. Nobody did. And every week it just kept getting bigger and more powerful, and it just kept growing in terms of popularity. So whatever original plans we may have had for it, quickly went out the window, because it just we couldn't have anticipated it was going to become as popular as it did. I guess it would be like, again, I'm not a musician, but you can sit down and write a song and send in a demo, and you think, wow, it's a pretty good song, and all of a sudden, you're a multi-platinum artist, and you had no idea that a song was going to connect the way it did. And that's kind of like the NWO. We knew it was going to be pretty good, but we had no idea it was going to be as big as it was. So the point, or the answer to your question is, yeah, we had originally had kind of an ending for it, but we shit-canned that right away and just decided to ride that horse as long as we possibly could. Eventually, where it was supposed to go, and this is where, the NWO kind of hit a brick wall when I left. Because as the NWO was becoming more popular, Nitro was becoming more popular, Ted Turner called me, I believe it was in July, I think of 99 or 98, whatever it was. I get my years mixed up. And basically said, hey, Eric, I want you to do another 2 hours of prime time for TBS. We were doing our show on TNT in 98 is when the call came in, I'm sure. And everything was rocking and rolling. We're on top of the world. Things are growing great. And all of a sudden now I have to produce an additional 2 hours of TV on Thursday nights. It may not sound like a big deal to people who don't produce television, but, to be
sounds
producing
huge,
the amount of television,
especially live, right? It had to be live, and everyone had to travel. It's twice the amount of work, basically, I remember, right?
It really was. And we were already kind of maxed out with Nitro. We were already operating at 110% capacity. So to get another 2 hours on top of that was a real ball buster. And creatively, I knew that to just end up doing the same thing on Thursday that I did on Monday would dilute Monday and weaken our position in the market. So my goal was to create another brand, and eventually I was going to have the NWO take over Nitro and have WCW have a home on TBS. And then I would have my own war between WCW and the NWO. That was where it was supposed to go. Unfortunately, AOL Time Warner intervened. I got canned, and it just kind of evaporated into thin air.
Well, yeah, I remember you guys had that test run, like right before Starrcade, I think in '97, where the NWO took over Nitro. You put on the NWO signs, you have the whole flashy intro ready to go, and the ratings didn't do so well. But what I remember, what I always wondered about that is, like, if the NWO had its own show, the NWO were the heels, and they would be facing the baby faces, but on their show they would be the baby faces, right? So would the
not necessarily not necessarily. First of all, the NWO, yes, they were kind of sort of heels, but they got some of the biggest. That was part of the, one of the biggest challenges, and I think one of the reasons why the whole NWO storyline to this very day. I mean, you mentioned the 25th anniversary of Raw. I'm in New York City at the Barclays Center, watching 18,000 people going nuts over the 25th anniversary of Raw, and all I could see when I looked out was NWO shirts. Angle's 20 years old. Hasn't been a part of television in a long, long time, but it's still there because it resonated so strongly with the audience. But the fact of the matter is, the NWO worked because it wasn't the traditional babyface heel formula. The NWO started off as being heels, and when Hogan turned on Randy Savage and all that kind of crap, they started out as heels. But because of the cool factor and the gang factor, that you pointed out as we began this interview, the audience started really reacting to them more positively than they did some of the traditional babyface.
Yeah, I mean, they were just too cool that, like, why wouldn't like myself included, I was totally on board with NWO, even though like the storyline might have portrayed like WCW as like trying to fight back and claim their ground. You were still kind of rooting for the NWO because they were so much cooler.
Well, and again, going back now, it's been 20 some odd years,
Right.
But the psychology behind my strategy was that the WCW audience, again, context is king here, go back and recognize that WCW as a company had its roots in the Southeast, very traditional. It was a part, it evolved out of the NWA. Ted Turner bought the NWA out of bankruptcy from the Crockett family. The NWA had been kind of a mainstay in their regional territory, was the Southeast part of the United States. And that's a very traditional wrestling audience. It still is to this day in many respects. So my goal was to kind of take advantage of that traditional wrestling loyalty, and that's why I wanted WCW on TBS, because historically that's where WCW/NWA was born and lived long before Nitro. That's why I chose NWO to live on TNT as the new kid on the block, or the East Coast team, if you will, and put WCW on TBS as the West Coast team, and have my own East Side Story or West Side Story, so to speak.
So it would the idea was almost like what WWE is doing now with Raw and SmackDown. You would have just kind of branched everyone off into two separate rosters, or would it have been the WCW wrestlers?
Yes.
Yeah, it would have been that. Like there would be a separate NWO crew and a separate WCW crew.
That was the idea going in. Yep.
And like with the NWO crew, would there be like infighting with it? Was the plan like infighting within the NWO, like members kind of?
Eventually,
right. It would have just been its own show. Yeah.
It would have been its own show. You would, much like if you go back and look at look at some of the middle seasons of Sons of Anarchy. Originally the gang was tight, the club was tight, they had their own things going on, their own business going on, but when they needed to kind of create more story, more drama, and more depth, they started creating power struggles within the club. It would have been no different with the NWO.
Right. Well, one more thing I wanted to ask you for the plan about, if you can think back. In 2001, you were planning with Fusion Media to take over WCW and buy it from Turner. And I remember at the time, WCW was writing off all of their biggest characters. Like Goldberg was off TV, Luger and Bagwell, Hogan, all the big stars were kind of being written off. And I remember there was an ad in a WCW magazine right before it got sold for the Big Bang, which was going to be like a relaunch pay-per-view that you were planning. And I was just curious if the deal went through and you did get control of WCW and the shows weren't canceled off TNT and TBS, you still had that TV going. What was the plan for the Big Bang and the idea for the relaunch?
We never got to the creative side of it. We knew we were going to have an event. We knew we wanted a relaunch. That was absolutely necessary. The original intent was to buy WCW, take 2 or 3 months off, and kind of create a absence makes the heart grow fonder factor, and relaunch with a completely fresh slate. So we were more involved in the kind of tactical and strategic planning of that than we were really in the creative. So we hadn't figured out, what the creative side of that was going to be. We were really focused on the tactical and strategic side of it.
Okay. And, one guy that returned this weekend at the Royal Rumble was Rey Mysterio. And Rey Mysterio, to me, blew my mind when he showed up in WCW in '96. And the Cruiserweight division in general was one of the most innovative moments in pro wrestling, and I feel like it really doesn't get the credit that it deserves because it essentially inspired this current generation of pro wrestlers, and like it kind of improved the work rate across the board in all of pro wrestling, whereas today I feel the work rate is miles ahead of then. When you first saw these luchadors and you were working on building Nitro and you needed to expand the cast, what was your first impression of seeing how fast-paced and innovative guys like Ray and Eddie were, to where they're still held up to today's standards, some of those matches?
Well, the cruiserweight division really didn't start in my mind, at least, or wasn't inspired in my mind by the luchadors. They came kind of after the fact. The catalyst for the cruiserweight division was Eddie, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Chris Jericho, who I had been watching over in New Japan, particularly Dean and Benoit and Eddie, because I was doing a lot of business with New Japan. They were doing a lot of business with New Japan. And I really loved that kind of fast-paced, hard-hitting, very believable style that I was seeing coming out of New Japan at the time. And since I was doing business with New Japan, and we had kind of a talent sharing agreement, we were doing a lot of things, strategically together throughout the year. New Japan had asked me to consider bringing Eddie and Dean and Chris over to WCW, so that between New Japan and WCW, we could basically control their calendar and control their schedule. Because what New Japan couldn't put them on the roster full time because of the nature of their scheduling and their business. So they wanted me to absorb some of that. And I, on the other hand, was looking for some fresh talent that brought that Japanese influence to Nitro. So that was the inspiration of that cruiserweight division. And then after I brought Dean and Eddie and Chris in, and then I went out almost immediately, went after Chris Jericho and started build that division. And that's when, the luchador thing started really catching my attention, and I brought them in. So that's how it grew. But it started with Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, and Eddie Guerrero.
Oh, I see. I didn't realize that. That's very cool. Okay. And just to wind things down here, you've once WCW ended, your production company, Bischoff Productions, produced a bunch of shows. You've gotten a bunch of shows on TV with Scott Baio, Billy Ray Cyrus. And one thing I read about modern wrestling promotions, all of these upstarts now, obviously no one's going to compete with WWE that quickly, but there's, it seems to be the only way to really be a successful company, if you want to branch out of just being an indie, is to get onto television. And that seems to be the one thing that no wrestling promotion other than WWE can really successfully do. New Japan is on Access. It's a small station. Impact is on Pop now. With the amount of ratings that wrestling brings and the relatively low cost of production compared to like a scripted show, why do you think, or why have you heard perhaps that these networks are kind of shy to get pro wrestling on their channels?
Well, a couple things. First of all, let's look at Pop TV ratings for TNA, or whatever it's called now, Impact.
Impact, yeah.
They'll do maybe somewhere between 250,000 viewers and 310,000 viewers on a weekly episode.
Yep.
I get more people than that on my podcast. So when you say, you preface your question by saying, wrestling gets relatively good ratings, that's not really true.
Well, but if you look at Pop's average, though...
No. Don't get to interrupt me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. You finish your statement. Absolutely. I apologize.
if you look at TNA or Impact, 300,000 viewers has absolutely no interest, or is completely uninteresting to any national advertiser on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Just doesn't exist. And it doesn't matter how it rates relative to pop, the rest of the pop TV schedule. If you can't get an advertiser to go, okay, I'll buy a 30-second spot inside of Impact Wrestling, it has no value. And as a matter of fact, Impact doesn't get one nickel from Pop TV. They give the show away. It costs them money to produce it, and they give it to Pop TV. I can tell you with fair certainty that if you called over to Pop TV and you told them you wanted to buy a national commercial inside of Impact, you could probably get it for a bucket of cold chicken and a six-pack of Mountain Dew.
I think I actually read in the Observer it's like $150 or something like that, or $300, something.
Yeah, okay, it's a little more expensive than a bucket of cold chicken, but it has no value.
Yeah.
So if TNA or Impact, which is one of only two shows outside of WWE on the air right now, maybe three, has absolutely no value and no interest to advertisers, why would any network want a wrestling show?
I see. I completely hear you. So let me rephrase the question then. What would a wrestling company need to do? And I'm excluding Impact because I feel that's a very damaged brand. What would a wrestling company have to do to get a major cable network to be interested in having their product on their channel outside of WWE, of course?
I think you would have to come to a network with a concept, creatively speaking, that was so unique, it evolved, and different than what the WWE currently is, that you could get people to actually sit through a meeting and listen to your pitch. Because the network executive, believe me, I'm in the business of pitching television shows, so I'm not kind of making this up.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
I live and breathe and die by this stuff every day. You know, television network executives, cable or otherwise, have been pitched every version of a wrestling show you can possibly think of. And for all intents and purposes, I could probably get a meeting with somebody, but they would probably only take the meeting out of courtesy because they knew me. If they didn't really know me personally, even with my background, I don't think I could get a meeting in Hollywood to pitch a show. I don't think you could get a network executive to carve out 20 minutes of their day to even listen to anybody about it because they've heard it all. And they've seen people try it. And everybody except for WWE has failed. So the appetite for a network to risk all of that primetime real estate, an extremely valuable real estate, on a television product that historically has failed everywhere it's been attempted outside of WWE, and even if one could possibly get a little bit of traction, advertisers don't want to be in it. So, you'd have to come in with something that was really innovative, something that you could convince an executive that was different enough from WWE that the audience might sample it. Mm-hmm. And in addition to that, you'd have to be able to prove to them that you had the financial resources to take some of the risk or the majority of the risk with them, because I don't think you could find a network that would financially be able to or be willing to be at risk for the kind of money that it would take. And lastly, whoever your investor would have to be an investor with a lot of patience, because it would take 5 to 10 years to really build that brand up enough to be able to compete, even remotely compete. When I say compete, I don't mean defeat. I mean to be able to stand up to WWE's ratings. If WWE's getting if WWE is doing 3 million viewers on a Monday night, if any other property out there was able to do 800,000 or 1 million, that would be considered a big win.
Right.
But that would take a long time.
Yeah, I mean, Impact was there for a little while when it was happening on Spike, and I feel like there was a moment for Impact to be that company that you're speaking of, but it just didn't work out for them. Whether it was just I don't know, miscalculation of finances or whatever Vince Russo ended up doing to get them off Spike, I don't know.
Yeah, there was a series of missed opportunities there over a period of time, and the biggest one, there was a couple. It was a misjudgment, poor judgment business wise, missed opportunity, which is also poor judgment business wise.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a moment in time, when TNA went on the road for Impact, and when we were doing relatively big numbers, 1 million plus viewers over a 2-hour period, and there was a moment in time when Viacom was interested in owning a part of Impact.
Oh, really?
And yeah, when they bought Bellator.
Right, because they want to have they want to own the brands that they have on their channels, so they don't have to renegotiate the contracts. Is that right?
Right. And there was a moment in time, and I was a big advocate to make that move, and to let Spike or Viacom own half the company, because that way you're assured you're going to be on television. You know what I mean? It's a guaranteed television platform at that point. And I advocated that strongly, and the powers to be, and the brain trust in Dallas, Texas, they were too greedy and didn't want to give up any control. They wanted to stay in control and felt like they would be giving that control up if they were to partner up with someone like Viacom. So they made the wise decision to employ a jail food mentality and keep 100% control over property that is no longer in existence.
Yeah, I think that, in retrospect, was not the right call. But here we are. Eric, I want to thank you so much for taking time. I'm sure you're a busy guy. This was an excellent conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you, especially these last few minutes about the wrestling business. And I want to say, I think it's kind of crazy while we're talking about how TV is not really interested in pro wrestling. It seems like there's this whole new audience that's formed for pro wrestling, or kind of pro wrestling nostalgia, I should say, with podcasting. It seems there's all of these podcasts. Bruce Pritchard's podcast, Something to Wrestle With, is doing huge numbers, and you have a podcast as well, Bischoff on Wrestling. Did you ever think when you left the pro wrestling industry that in fact it would pull you back in to sit there and try to remember all these things from 20 years ago because of what a huge budding industry podcasting is?
Yeah, I'm going to close this up with that because I've got another call I'm going to jump on. But first of all, my podcast is on hiatus for a couple more weeks. But yeah, there's a proliferation of wrestling podcasts out there. Bruce Pritchard's being the most successful. But I think one of the things that we're also seeing is that, look at New Japan Pro Wrestling. A lot of the success they're having is not necessarily from Access TV as much as it is from digital streaming. Right. And the variety of streaming platforms out there right now. There's a great promotion down in Austin, Texas called Wrestle Circus, and they produce their shows and they stream them live on Twitch TV. House of Hardcore, Tommy Dreamer's company, same thing. Produces his live events, streams them live on Twitch TV. So there's just a lot of streaming. Fight TV's got an app now where people can watch independent wrestling on Fight TV. So while traditional cable television may be hard, if not impossible, for all the reasons we discussed, to get on, there are other opportunities now for independent promoters and the talent with them to get a ton of exposure, on digital platforms. So anyway, I got to run, man. Let's remind the fans to stop by, Astronomicon on the 10th and 11th in Sterling Heights. I'm going to be there. Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, a whole bunch of other guys are going to be there, and some other great horror and comic book characters you're going to want to meet. So should be fun. I get to come back to Detroit for the first time in many, 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 many years. So I'm looking forward to that. And I got to run.